Hello and welcome to the Stories of Northern Life podcast. I bring to you the last episode of the Women's History series. These women have inspired me in many ways to be a better person for our community, as well as for myself. But I want to share with you one more pretty incredible woman. This special woman is noted on the signs entering Sault Ste. Marie. Not only does she have a handful of things bearing her name in Sault Ste. Marie, a government building, a community pavilion, and a parkway, but she has 6 elementary schools named after her across Canada, being in Abbotsford, BC, Ottawa, Ontario, Ajax, Ontario, Brampton, Ontario, Vaughan, Ontario, and even Calgary, Alberta. She is the brightest role model for kids growing up in the Soo, instilling that even coming from Sault Ste. Marie, you can still accomplish your wildest dreams. If you don't know who I'm talking about by now, well, get ready for an unforgettable story. Roberta Lynn Bondar. We've come to love her from her time as an astronaut and furthering research in science. But she continues to impress us with her breathtaking photography and her motivational words as she speaks to people across the globe. Roberta was born and raised here in Sault Ste. Marie. Born December 4th, 1945 at Plummer Hospital. And leave it up to Roberta to have looked up the weather on that day. It was beautiful and tranquil. Roberta's father was Edward Bondar and mother Mildred Grolet, but went by Gibson and Wybra. Both parents were Siouites. Her father always wanted to be a chartered accountant, but because he could not reach the requirements of the position, he never reached that goal. But he applied to the office managership at the Public Utility Center and stayed there for the rest of his life, unfortunately passing in 1984. Her mother always wanted to go to university, but was also already great at teaching. She taught in Girl Guides, the church, the YMCA, and was a supply teacher at Bowating. She later received her BA over a 7-year period. The same year, Roberta received her PhD. And then she began teaching full-time at Bowating. Roberta's sister is another very important figure in her life. Barbara was born in 1944, September the 11th, and is 15 months older than Roberta. They also had 2 cats in their home. One got hit by a car too young, but the other they had for 18 years. And her name was Stripey, because she had stripes, of course. They lived at 308 McGregor Avenue in the Soo. Like most kids growing up here, she had a little neighborhood gang, and still invites a lot of these lifelong friends to events and gatherings. The neighborhood parents would tell her and her sister to get down from climbing trees. Another neighbor would send them shortbread and fancy plates as gifts, and they would go over to the other neighbor's house to watch Flash Gordon and other black and white movies on their new fancy TV set because they didn't have one. Though their home never changed, she had to move schools because the borderline of the bus route was on McGregor Ave. She started junior kindergarten at Queen Elizabeth, but after a few days, she had to move to Elliott Moore. Then going into grade 6, she was back at Queen Elizabeth. In grade 6, she started being turned on to science. This is the year they started doing experiments and developing a hypothesis. Her father, being a great dad, would turn the basement into whatever his daughters were passionate about at the time. He found beakers and flasks and set up a station, turning the basement into a lab for Roberta. Roberta and the whole family would often go to the library, and it was a fun family affair. Books were a treasure, and they all enjoyed reading and learning. Her sister and herself were in Girl Guides too. In the early days, she would go and help feed the people who were having difficulty in the C wing of Plummer Hospital. She learned lots of great skills in Girl Guides, and it most definitely got them engaged in the community. Roberta and her sister also went to the YMCA on March Street and took fencing because Zara was their hero. But they also took other programs at the Y because their mother was there at least once a week every Thursday night for over 37 years, teaching physically challenged kids to swim, with a partnership with Rotary and the family YMCA. Her mother never missed a chance to teach these kids. It was hard to get them in the water, but once they were in, they were free from their wheelchairs. What a rewarding program to be so heavily involved in. Mildred received a Paul Harris Fellowship because of this. Her dad was also heavily involved as a Rotarian. The idea of a service group was so important to this family. They were just so engaged with the community, and Roberta and her sister really enjoyed the opportunity this gave them. They were a relatively poor family, but the accessibility of church groups, the Y, Girl Guides, the library, and the love of her parents didn't make it seem like it. Her parents made sure they could do whatever they wanted. Leadership was important to her mother, so Roberta learned to look at leadership potential in any situation. There were so many things they could do because they were so engaged in the community. They never had to think of what to do next. She would walk and hop on the bus, and she had a great safety net of a family and community support, so if they did fail, they could get up and try again. And that really tested her leadership skills and potential. The Sioux allowed her to dream and grow those dreams into reality. From the young age of 8, she put together toy rockets with her sister. She would fantasize about flying around in planes through the clouds. And at 15, she watched a rocket launch in 1960 and rushed to the end of her uncle's dock on Lake Superior to see it go. But these dreams were set on hold for the next little chapter of her life. But don't worry, they come back again. Sir James Dunn High School was an exciting time for Roberta. She got her driver's license and her mother let her drive her car to school. She played sports and strengthened her love for learning. Her sciences were great, as we all imagined, and she loved it all, though she was really interested in chemistry. Her best subjects in high school were actually French and English. Oh, and phys ed, of course. In those days, she wanted to be a phys ed or science teacher, following the steps of her mother and the direction her sister was also headed. She excelled as an athlete and played basketball and volleyball. She also had a little bit of a rebellious side. Needing to eat something before practice, a friend and she would sneak in snacks to class. She had to write 1,000 lines of "I will not eat in class." But she used her intellect and taped 4 to 5 pencils together to write them all faster. A really big accomplishment for Roberta was when she came in first place at the Sioux's Rotary Science Fair when she was in grade 13, and she exclaims that really changed her life. Overall, she loved her time at Sir James Dunn. She even stayed in touch and visit with her French teacher after all the years. Now let's move on to her university career. It's a long road ahead, a whole 13 years in fact. Like I said, she was thinking of being a teacher. At the time, you needed a 4-year honors Bachelor of Science to be a teacher of the sciences, the subject she wanted to eventually teach. Roberta was working as a student at the Forest Insect Laboratory over the summer after graduation, and got the job because of the science fair. This job helped her think about science as something she wanted to do. This job really changed her curiosity and helped her deal with the fear factor. She became not squeamish about anything. She liked knowing how things worked, and the job overall really helped her with the long term of spaceflight. She was heavily influenced by the people at this job. Lots of employees swayed her into attending the University of Guelph. It was a brand new university in a city of a similar size to the Sioux and not too far from Toronto. So she started at the University of Guelph in 1964, the same year the university was founded. Her background in high school came in good use here. She excelled in chemistry, but in history of agriculture compared to the rest of her cohort, her grades were not as high. Something else I would like to note is that the male and female ratio wasn't exactly equal. Out of a couple hundred students, there are about 20 female. And as she continued throughout her years at Guelph and beyond, the female numbers decreased more and more. She was actually intending to do a 1-year degree at McMaster for phys ed after her undergrad. That all changed once she got mumps. and it was not good. She had a paralyzed shoulder that restricted her from lifting her arm, and because of it, she needed to stop flying. Yes, she was learning to fly at the time, and needed to stop her university basketball team, archery, and also coaching, as well as pitching hay at a nearby farm. And to top it all off, they also canceled the program at Mac. She thought her life was over. She had said that she felt like a ball in a pinball machine with all these posts that she didn't put up. Her high school plans didn't come into fruition, but she ended up being that doctor, spaceman, scientist, and photographer, which is what she wanted all along, but never knew how to get there or if it was ever possible. To touch on the flying again, her uncle was a pilot and would fly out of Chippewa, Michigan. He eventually started taking her up for rides too, and she fell in love with flying. On these trips in her youth, she took control and did 360s and enjoyed looking out the window. But even her parents were also taking her and her sister out wandering down Queen Street, getting ice cream and stopping by the dock to watch water bombers. She simply loved airplanes. So when she was old enough, she began achieving her pilot's license. And when she continued out of the Sault airport. But because of the startling illness, she was given the key to a lab to make up some credit and help one of her profs research. And she fell in love with histology, which is the study of cells. She talked to another professor, and she suggested to Roberta to do a master's in a medical department, not zoology or agriculture. In fact, she was very interested in veterinary medicine, specifically in her last 2 years at Guelph, because of this growing interest in human medicine. And so she did what that professor suggested. She continued her education in a pathology department and worked on high blood pressure rats, to be exact. But first, she graduated from the University of Guelph in 1968. And that was the last summer she worked in the Sault and played on a softball team. Her parents also bought 1,000 acres of rehabilitated farmland on St. John's Island around this time. They used the property for a tree farm, and it was another place for Roberta to escape to nature and use her background from attending an agriculture school. The family also had a cottage at Pt.1 Bay at the end of Hummingbird Lane for her to escape to. When starting her next chapter at Western, she was devastated to be in school full-time and couldn't go back home. But she made that sacrifice and received a master's in experimental pathology at the University of Western in London, Ontario. There, Roberta worked at an institute where they did autopsies on mentally challenged children to figure out the cause of death while at Western. And there, the brain really fascinated her. So she switched microscopes from a fluorescent to an electron microscope with black and white printing and neurosciences. She then moved to Toronto and completed her doctorate in neurobiology from the University of Toronto. Her time in Toronto brought her much more than the title of doctor. But this part of the story is where she faced some challenges and adversity. Find out how her path continued to weave and head straight on to reaching space and achieving so much more beyond that. I will continue with a part 2 of this episode because there is just so much to tell of the incredible Roberta Bondar's life.